What is happening out there, rotoscouts basketball fans? Welcome back, gang. First show back. First slate back. Actually made it on the air today. Got a little worried, ended up just crashed out for longer than I intended. Took a lot of effort to get up and get the projections done today after a long break. Was worried I wasn't going to have everything done in time to hop on here. A little bit of a late start, 4:40, but we'll get things done. We'll go up to like 6-ish, somewhere around there. 10 games to talk about, lot to talk about. Not that many missing players. Handful of questionables to deal with, a lot of probables. Good amount of outs, but typically guys that have been out for some time now that we're kind of used to already. Not a lot of crazy curveballs. If you're playing a slate that has that late game with the Lakers on it, LeBron is out. So you've got that situation going, but we already know that. That one's not on our main slate, though. 10 games running through the 9 o'clock games on both sites. Looks like a pretty good one. Not a lot so far of crazy, super cheap values. We're getting most of our value plays right now anyway out of the mid-range. The 4s, the 5s, that kind of a territory. So it should be an interesting slate. Probably going to lean a little bit more toward balanced type builds. So it should be interesting, but I'm sure we'll have stuff pop up. Unknowns always change the equation as we get in. Let's say hi to everybody, though. Cujo's here. Hope everyone had a good NBA break after the break. Cujo, the first one in the door, as usual. Gotta love it. I had a good break. I was, let's see, what do we do? Thursday, I told you guys Thursday. Went down and hung out with my niece, and that's why we didn't have a show last Thursday for that little 3-gamer. Did have projections that day. Then we had Friday, stayed down at my parents' house, hung out there, and then came back Friday night, just kind of hung out. Saturday, went to the show, saw Flogging Molly over in Montclair, New Jersey, so that was a good time. And then have just been kind of doing nothing the last few days, which is good. Need those days of just absolute vegetation. Caught up on some TV. Not that I have a lack of time to watch TV, of course, as you guys know. Beat Act 2 of Baldur's Gate, on to Act 3. Anybody out there playing that? Great game. If you like RPGs, great RPG. But yeah, that's about it. It's been slow. Been keeping vampire hours as usual. Up all night. Sleep through the through the daylight hours. Let's see who else is here. Trey's here. Trey missed my face. That must have been a long break, buddy, if that's the case. This ugly mug. Travis is here. What's going on, Trav? Kevin O. Kevin O nails it. That was a long break. It sure was. Help me settle an argument with my dad. Was Steve Young a running quarterback? To me, he was. My dad says no. Yeah, to me, he was, one of the earlier generation, run and gun West Coast type guys. I'd say so. We are going off down a rabbit hole already, huh? Let's see. Not a guy I've looked at statistically in forever, or like at all, since, not really on top of his numbers since back when he played, but we can take a quick look here. In my mind and in my memory, he was, more so than the average quarterback back then anyway. Yeah, you know what? It's not crazy, like, compared to, he's not Lamar. But, rushing, like 94, 16 games, ran for 293 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground, 5.1 yards per rush attempt. 93, ran for 407 and 2 touchdowns in 16 games, 5.9 yards per rush attempt. 92, he carried the ball 76 times for 537 yards, 4 touchdowns, 7.1 yards per rush attempt. Basically carried the ball through those years about 4 or 5 times a game, 6 times a game in 91. He ran for 415 yards on 66 carries that year, 6.3 yards per rush attempt. Steve Young was a running quarterback. No doubt. You win that one, Trey. Yeah, not Lamar. Exactly. Not Lamar. Certainly not... get all blurry there when I move the camera. Yeah, he's no Lamar Jackson. He's not, any of the modern rushing quarterbacks, right? But those are decent numbers, especially for back then. It was, not the thing to do necessarily. Throwbacks is here. What's going on? Christopher's here. Living the dream. Love it. Mark K. Mark K says, DFS is life exactly 3 years ago. I won 175K on DK. First slate after the All-Star break. I'm ready to do it again. Love it, Mark. Let's go get it, man. You on DraftKings or FanDuel? I plan on taking down the FanDuel one. Both of them got decent tournaments for the welcome back slates, which is good. I just wish FanDuel would do this tournament every day. Just the lower buy-in. I don't care that it's a giant field. Like, I'm fine with that. But put a good amount up top. Make it competitive. Make it fun. That's the thing that I think the sites miss. And everybody talks about, is the population, is the interest waning? Is the population for DFS dwindling? Blah, 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 blah. I think it's just more, if you build it, they will come. If you have good contests, people will fill them. Maybe not the first day, like we saw one for FanDuel didn't fill the other day. When they dropped down to that $4 one and had the massive 100 and, change whatever field. But if they're doing that every day and people know it's there, they'll definitely go play it. DraftKings also had a very cheap one that day, so it was, took away from some of FanDuel's. But I think for both of them, you just got to keep rolling out the good slates, and the people will find them. And this is me stalling to put in my placeholders. There we go. Mark's on FanDuel too. All right, so I'll see you up at the top, Mark. Let's put it that way. Randall Cunningham, Donovan McNabb were the true running quarterbacks back then, says 40. Yeah, Randall, Donovan were definitely on that list too. But Steve Young, I mean, those are solid numbers for that. No doubt about it. That was also back when it was more of it was a line, right? You're a runner of a quarterback. You're not a thrower. And a lot of it came down along stupid lines that we don't need to get into. I think you guys could probably figure out what I'm talking about. And I'm glad that all of that has gotten out of the sport finally. And that people have realized that, no, it's actually really good to have a quarterback who can really run the ball and scramble and do amazing things on the field. But it was definitely, it was almost more of it was like a stigma almost, right? Like, you've got a running quarterback, you're not going to go anywhere kind of a thing back then. And they weren't doing design plays much. And that's where, like, Young did have design runs. And Cunningham did have some design runs and stuff. And those guys really succeeded. But it was really different. And it's a good change for the game that it's gone to the modern game where we can actually value those kinds of things. Anyway, let's see who else is going on. 40 to great, 40's glad too. Yeah, it's the better version of the game, and it's a better version of just life and people talking about it. Anyway, let's get into this because we do have a lot to talk about beyond 1990s NFL. One minor change to the, it's not even something that's going to be on the board because I took him out, and he ran through the sim with no ownership anyway, so it didn't matter. But Isaiah Stewart officially out. He was originally questionable, suspended for 3 games, I think it was. Came out just a few minutes ago. I don't think that's going to have any major impact. It just equals a couple more minutes for Wiseman, and maybe some Muscala minutes. But neither one of them, when I reran it, came up all that interesting. So not going to show in here, but I don't think it's a scenario we have to really worry about. Let's pull up the game rundowns, and we'll talk through this slate. All right, starting off on the Vegas board. Orlando at Cleveland. Cleveland favored by 8. Kind of low end game there. 217.5 point total. Some low scoring, defensively oriented options in those games. Not sure how anybody came through. I haven't gone man by man through the numbers here yet. It does look like we've got a pretty decent return from Mobley there at the top of the board. Darius Garland not looking terrible. So we do have some parts, at least from the Cleveland side. I'm not seeing a lot of Orlando initially, but this is just limited to that very top of the board on a very large slate. So we might get some pieces and parts creeping through from that one. Looks like mostly from Cleveland. The one I'm not seeing is Mitchell, the guy I'd really want to get to. We'll see where he lands. He's been just tearing it up, so never mind getting to him, but it doesn't look like he's coming through all that strongly based off that low total. Next game, Brooklyn at Toronto. Toronto favored by 1.5 at home, 231.5 point total there. Detroit, Indy, the big total on the board at 246.5. Indy favored by 12. Some missing parts still for Indy. Should be similar to what we've seen from them in terms of the DFS value today. They'll hit the board. Some guys from Detroit will probably be on the board with that total. The Knicks and the Sixers. Knicks getting a little bit healthier. Bojan probable. Hartenstein probable. Still no OG, no Randall, no Mitch Robinson, but a little bit better than they were right before the break. Back to that, kind of interesting team that they were with the short rotations. Phoenix at Dallas. Dallas favored by 1.5, 245 point total in that one. Another pretty juicy one. Houston at New Orleans. New Orleans favored by 7 at home, 227 point total. Boston and Chicago. Boston favored by 8.5 on the road. Low total in that one, 223 points. Some decent players, obviously. A couple good options from Chicago, and then some very good options from Boston. But that low total, the idea of, somewhat, like Chicago's like middle of the road defensively. The Celtics are obviously great. So it could be a low-ish scoring game where the Celtics still get out by a decent lead, and it just cuts into, a minute or two off the top. Not necessarily like blowout, sit the whole fourth quarter type run. But maybe it's, you don't sub into the fourth quarter until 8 minutes left instead of 10 minutes left or whatever. So maybe a little bit of a downgrade. Just not the greatest spot in the world on that one. Clippers at OKC should be a good game. OKC favored by 1 point at home, 235.5 points total. Washington at Denver should not be a good game. Denver favored by 15.5, 233 point total. Definitely one to watch in terms of blowout, but I feel like it's going to be 32, 34 minutes of Jokic get his numbers anyway in that one. We'll see what came through on Washington's side. There might be a couple value pieces, but I don't think so. Nothing really jumped out, just as I was putting it together before. But maybe we'll check the sim numbers. Charlotte at Utah. Utah favored by 10, 228.5. And then the two late games, LA and Golden State, and San Antonio and Sacramento, not on either slate. Those are two juicy games. It's a shame we don't have them. There's 242.5 points in both of those games. Let's look at the ins, the outs. So as of the 4 o'clock update that I ran, we had probables, Cade Cunningham, Isaiah Hartenstein, Bojan Bogdanovic, Luka, Maxi Kleber, Derek Lively, Jaden Springer is available, KCP, Jamal Murray, Julian Strawther, all probable. Questionable, Isaiah Stewart, which we can now cross off. He's suspended and he's out. Just update that real quick. Right. Just updating that for the notes on the site. So additional questionables, Jalen Smith, potentially somewhat biggie. Nick, but just because of the per minute value that he creates, even in low minute situations for a guy like Jackson. Nick Batum, questionable. Paolo Banchero, Donovan Mitchell, Bradley Beal, Reggie Bullock, Brendan Ingram, and Cody Zeller, all questionable. And then outs, Jonte Porter, Quentin Grimes is doubtful, Aaron Nesmith, OG Anunoby, Julius Randle, Mitch Robinson, Robert Covington, Joel Embiid, Kenny Lofton Jr., DeAnthony Melton, Terquavian Smith. So the Sixers still missing a lot of pieces. Markelle Fultz, Torrey Craig, Zach LaVine, Patrick Williams, Tari Eason, Dyson Daniels, LaMelo Ball, Mark Williams, Nick Smith Jr., Nathan Mensah, Leaky Black, and Otto Porter Jr. are all out. That's what we know so far. Yeah, Vic was a ridiculous talent with his legs, an okay quarterback with a great arm, and not very good human being. And we'll leave it at that. Not a big Michael Vick fan. Liked him better in Madden as a little tiny pixelated video game guy than I do the actual human being. I know I said I'd leave it there, but you just don't fucking do that to dogs. You just don't. Sorry. You do that to dogs, and you're just automatically a piece of shit, and I have no real interest in what happens to you. I have forgiveness in my heart. I have, second chances and all of that, but that is just really, really low. Anyway, let's talk about this slate. Benedict Mather and Keontae George Day. Everybody ready for that? Should be fun. Top two owned players on both sites, coming up at the top of the board on both sites. Ben Mathurin, 66.8% winner, 76% of the top 150 for 5,000 shooting guard small forward on FanDuel. On DraftKings, 52% winner, 65% of the top 150. Keontae George actually came up more. 4,700 for Keontae George, stepping into starters minutes now. He played 40.5 minutes the other night before the break, 51 FanDuel points. Had a game before that as well after the trade deadline from just picking up more minutes. On FanDuel, he's priced at 58, which is ish. It's right-ish for him in this spot, and he's still coming up a decent amount. Both guard spots on DraftKings at 47. You can see the points per dollar. 6.62 is the best points per dollar option on the entire slate. He looks like a smash spot on the DraftKings slate. You don't have multi-position. It's the one downside, but you can flex him around the board a little bit with the util spot if you need to. That said, he looks like he's dominating the point guard spots. Just looking down, you get $6,100 Tyus Jones down here, $5,500 Trey Mann. So just save money. It's not like you're talking about a massive gulf in talent where you're sacrificing not getting Trey Mann, you're sacrificing not getting Tyus Jones. Just pay less, get to Keontae George. Not to say that Jones and Mann are off the board by any means. They're obviously justified by these sim numbers. But he looks like he's dominating the point guard spot on DraftKings. Zion landing like a decent play, 7,800. That's kind of interesting. 20% winner there, 19% on FanDuel. Wasn't really expecting that one to pop. Grant Williams on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I didn't like. The reason I was saying that reluctantly was I was looking at the FanDuel price. 54 power forward. Comes through okay. He's playable on FanDuel, but doesn't look great. On DraftKings at 45, multi-position eligible. Looks pretty decent. 20% across the board. So let's see. From that Orlando-Cleveland game, we do have Franz right here. As I mentioned, we've got Mobley up here. Garland. Just want to see that one. That one's coming up a bit. Not like crazy. It really is. It looks like it really is just those three guys, actually. And then nothing for Spider. Jeez. He's already questionable. And it doesn't look like even if he does go, we've got a ton here for him. 0.66% winner on FanDuel, 0.18 didn't pop in the top 150 on either site. I've got him a little lower than what his numbers have been over the last 30 days. And for the season. This is about an even money game on the Cleveland side in terms of expected possessions. But again, just a low total. Kind of cuts into the upside for everybody. Actually got him a little bit ahead of some of the other sites. But doesn't look like Donovan Mitchell day. The one that's interesting is looking like Mobley. That is a decent win rate at 38.6%. 6,700 power forward and center on the DraftKings slate. Landed in 50+% of the top 150. On FanDuel, he's less than that, but he's playable. 25% win rate, 31% of the top 150. That's good playable, not even like, kind of playable. EB, what's going on? What's up, buddy? What else we got here? Suggs not really landing. Jarrett Allen on the FanDuel side, but not as much on DraftKings. 7,700 center and power forward for a 1.19 per minute guy. Not a bad price for Jarrett Allen. Got him at 115 for tonight. Isaac Boncaro, minorly playable on FanDuel. It's just interesting. I guess it really is just these three guys, though. Mobley, Franz Wagner, Darius Garland, primarily. And Wagner not really on FanDuel. Anyway, let's get off this game. Lowest end game of the day. Just wanted to see why they were up that high. Let's get into some position by position. Got like a thingy there. Colin Sexton, another piece from Utah. Shining through pretty decently. He went 33.9 the other night. Put up 55 on the FanDuel scale. 1.16 for the season. 26.7% usage rate. More of a known commodity in his typical situation, even fewer minutes. More minutes than the average, fewer minutes than what he did, what he went the other night. but comes up a ton. 31.4% winner, 40% of the top 150 on DraftKings, 46% winner, 48% of the top 150 on FanDuel. He is the second most popular player on both sites. So we're going to see it is chalky around that Utah team. And then from the same game, Trey Mann on the other side of it, also coming up fairly chalky. 26.25% winner on DraftKings, 31% of the top 150. Let's see where he landed popularity-wise. Yeah, he's in the top 10, let's put it that way, in terms of overall DraftKings popularity. On FanDuel, he's priced up. He's at 66. So not really landing quite as hard on the FanDuel slate. He's not in top 20, it doesn't look like. Where is he? Charlotte. Yeah, on FanDuel, he's sub 10% ownership, which kind of jibes pretty well with these numbers. All right, sub 10% ownership against a 12% win rate. That means the field is a little bit behind on him, even at the higher price. And we can get out to 15, 16% against the field's sub 10%. You're taking a minor position on him, but he's been good in that spot. I mean, 29 minutes and change the other night, put up 44 FanDuel points. He's been justifying being playable at around this price. On DraftKings at the cheap price, he just looks good. Tyus Jones, about a point per minute and 39.5 the other night. He's been about a point per minute all season long. Just a 16.7% usage rate, not the highest usage guy, not the big-time shooter by any means. But we do get a solid assist rate, 58.5% true shooting, 31.1% assist rate, 4.6% on the rebounds, 6.8 assists a game, 12.6 points. Taking 3.8 threes, making 1.6 of them, which is 42% from beyond the arc. So if you get a day where he takes a couple additional threes, that score could escalate pretty quickly. Those are the days where we see him trend upwards into the 40s and he really crushes value. At 73 on FanDuel, it's another one kind of like Trey Mann, priced up a little bit against the actual upside. And he's one where it looks like the field is probably a little over on him. Came up at a sub 10% win rate. We got to him just 4% of the time in the top 150. I expect, if I check the ownership here. Yeah, so it's the exact opposite of that Trey Mann situation. He's out a few points ahead of this win rate, which cuts our interest in him in our top 150. On DraftKings, just looks like a very good is who he is spot at 6,100. Book your 5.5 points per dollar in that spot where you're not taking the shares of Keontae George at point. I think Tyus Jones makes a ton of sense. I think Darius Garland makes some sense here. You've got options beyond Keontae George. It's just the points per dollar that really kill it for George. RJ Barrett, shooting guard, small forward on the DraftKings slate, landed in 30% of the top 150 against a 17% win rate. That's not bad. Let's see where his ownership is at. That must mean he's fairly lowish owned. Yeah, RJ, single digits ownership on the DraftKings slate makes him kind of interesting. It's a good price at 6,900, 1.02 DraftKings points per minute on the season. Since joining Toronto, let me get back to Wowie here real quick. I closed it by accident. .633 minutes, 1,300 possessions since, whoops, why did that change back to the Wizards? That's weird. It still says Toronto, but it flipped and it had the Raptors data up here, and then it flipped and gave me all the Wizards data. Weird site. All right. 633 possessions, 633 minutes, 1,300 possessions since January 1, which is roughly when they joined the Raptors. 1.06 per minute on FanDuel, 1.09 on DraftKings for RJ. We've got him right in that kind of territory. He's at 1.05 on the FanDuel scale tonight in projections. And the reason I bring it up is, and I'm going to continue harping on it, Emmanuel Quickly, 0.96 FanDuel points per minute, 1.0 DraftKings points per minute since joining the team. I've got him right in that territory again. But he pulls like really similar ownership to RJ at really similar pricing. The positions are obviously different. I don't think it's totally justified. RJ is the better fantasy producer. RJ is the better player. RJ's got flexibility at both spots for 69. Quickly, just to put a fine point on it. Quickly lands in 3.3% of the top 150, 4.48% of the winners for 6,800 at point guard. For 100 less, you just get a lot more out of RJ Barrett most nights. Quickly's got the microwave scoring ability. Quickly can go out there and put up a big scoring day. But by and large, he doesn't. Or hasn't, anyway, since arriving in Toronto. Where was Scotty on that list? Scotty still has point guard eligibility on DraftKings at 8,800. He lands in more of the lineups than Quickly does at the same position. 7.02% of the winners. That said, just 1.3% of the top 150. Means he's probably a little more popular than he should be. Yeah, he's double digit. He's 10+% ownership on DraftKings. Quickly getting half a point more ownership on DraftKings than RJ. Between the three of them, I like RJ. I really do. I'm not saying that RJ is necessarily going to outscore Scotty Barnes in a raw sense, and he's not projected to. He's 5 points below the projection. But for that money difference, I prefer RJ in that spot. And so do the Sims. Middle of the board, Kyrie looks decent on DraftKings anyway. 12.6% winner, 21% of the top 150. Means he's probably underowned. Yeah, he's projected for not that much popularity. It's a big slate, but he's projected for a popularity number lower than that win rate, and we're more than double the projected ownership. So it looks like Kyrie is a decent position on this slate on DraftKings at 9,000. On FanDuel, he's playable, and he did double up his win rate in terms of the exposure, but he's 9,700 at both guard spots over there. It's a little bit of a different price play even against the higher cap. That said, he does have a very nice ceiling. 33 minutes the other night, 63 FanDuel points. There's all kinds of upside with Kyrie if you catch him on the right day. Game against Phoenix might have him motivated. It's a spot where I think it's right on. Yeah, they pick up about a possession. So we've got Luka looking pretty good at low ownership in terms of just being Luka at low ownership, but expensive. Kyrie pulls through with better sim numbers here. Since we haven't seen Luka, I feel fairly comfortable saying that. Yep, both sites, Kyrie lands better. But Kyrie on DraftKings looks like the play from the Dallas backcourt. Luka, you can always throw in, right? Luka's a luxury item. That's why you use value guys. You save money. You can throw Luka into any lineup, any given slate, any matchup. Doesn't really matter. But you're spending 12-1, 12-6 to do it. So when we're talking about the math of the slate, the sims and everything, that's going to have a really big impact. Some days where we've got a lot of value, which, if you remember the top of the show, one of the first things I said was not a lot of crazy value today. So that restricts our ability to really land Luka mathematically in these lineups. On DraftKings at 12-1, there's a little bit of room for him. 4.6% winner, 6% of the top 150. And I expect those 6% are going to all be in some of those top lineups that we look at the end of the show. But it really is Kyrie that's coming through out of all these guys. And then on FanDuel at 12-6, Luka just didn't hit the board at all. Cade, if he plays, 8,300 on FanDuel, pretty decent price, 9.5% winner, 11% of the top 150. 10s across the board at 7,600 on the DraftKings slate. He's been at 1.17 DK points per minute. For 7,600, not a bad spot overall. High-paced game against Indy, one of the highest total games on the board. You've got Ben Mathurin coming out of that game, who's just going to be dominant in a lot of spots. Not that you necessarily need to book any kind of correlation, but it's nice to have other pieces in a very, very high-end game that should have some pace. Dante DiVincenzo, probable back for the Knicks. No, excuse me, he's not even probable. He's just back. 16.3% win rate on the FanDuel slate. Shooting guard, small forward for 7,800. 28% of our top 150 looks like a pretty key item from the mid-range. On DraftKings, 10.7% win rate. 10% of the top 150. Or excuse me, 6.6% of the top 150. My eyes jumped up a line. So it looks like DiVincenzo may be a little bit too popular on DraftKings. Keeps him very playable, but doesn't look like the potential smash that he is on FanDuel. That said, it's not actually bad at all. His projected ownership is between here and here. It's in the single digits. I have no issues if you wanted to just take the win rate and say I'm going to play DiVincenzo 10%, 10 to 12%, somewhere in that neighborhood. But I'm a lot more interested in him on the FanDuel slate. Darius Garland, I skipped over him, but I mentioned him briefly when we were looking at Orlando and Cleveland. But again, at 6,500, you're just talking about a good per minute guy if you catch him on the right day. He's had a lot of games this year. He's been at just 0.98 for this season, but a 25.4% usage rate, 1.01 points per minute on DraftKings at 5,900. Put up just 24.7 FanDuel points in 30 minutes the other night. I get that it hasn't been there a ton this year, but the prices are reflecting that, right? And we know there is upside there. Just not the greatest game environment. But he is coming up more than the win rate on DraftKings, more than his popularity on DraftKings, and well more than his popularity on FanDuel. That actually is worth looking at. Projected ownership is right in the territory of the win rate. It's like right here. Whoops. And we doubled that up basically. I think anywhere between those two numbers is perfectly fine. If you wanted to be a little bit more conservative about it, not take a position on Darius Garland, then you're looking to be more in this 20% range. If you're looking to say, hey, that looks like a good spot to me at 65, you can crest up to, toward that 40% range. I like him a little bit better in the more, I think, conservative DraftKings spot here, where we're getting him at 16% of the winners, right ahead of the field with a 23% exposure rate. I think I probably like him with a little bit less exposure. Just because of the game environment more than anything. Yeah, that is well ahead of the field on FanDuel. The win rate is 7-8 points ahead of the field, and then obviously this is significantly ahead, two to three times the exposure on FanDuel. So I think we can get away with probably cutting that a little bit, make some room in some of our lineups to avoid the game environment there. But he does look like a great spot considering the price, the points per dollar that are available. But it'll probably be, maybe knock 10 percentage points off of this, 10 to 15 percentage points. Get him in like the 25-30% range, I think is all right. Buddy Hield, not really much there on FanDuel, but on DraftKings coming through a little bit. 6,700 shooting guard, small forward. 12% winner, 11% of the top 150. Getting into the single-digit guys here on DraftKings, but we've got a few outliers across sites to talk about. Cody Martin from the Charlotte-Utah game. A lot of pieces in that Charlotte-Utah game, man. It's just price-based because everybody in that game that's relevant outside of like the higher priced Markkinens of the world. All these guys are, 46s, 51s, 47s. So we're getting a lot of pieces just coming up from that just based on price. But there is definitely some opportunity here. Cody Martin at 51, 28 minutes, both guard spots, coming up with a 25% win rate on FanDuel, but just exposed to him 12.6% of the time in our top 150. On DraftKings, he didn't come up at all in the top 150 at 4,600, both guard spots. 5.6% win rate, but we didn't get him. I'm guessing that means he's a little bit more popular than that on both sites. Yowza. Woof. That is a lot of FanDuel ownership. He's in the Cody Martin's projected in the high single digits on DraftKings in terms of ownerships. In terms of ownership, and we didn't get him in the top 150 lineups. He's projected a little higher than this win rate. If you wanted him, if you said, hey, I need to grab a couple of shares of him just because it looks like an okay value spot and the public's going to be there, and I don't want to look like a dum-dum if he does get there, so I want to have him in a few lineups. If you think that way, I get it. Grab around 5%. I don't know that I would go up to 10. I think the 5 is a little bit more appropriate. He's a 0.77 per minute guy over the course of the entire season. 22 FanDuel points in 30 minutes the other night is about what you normally get from him. And then on FanDuel, his ownership is projected to be at or above this win rate. So I think getting about half the field's ownership on him on FanDuel is appropriate. 5,100, it is a decent play, but he's going to be really popular with a lot of downside. Bigger basement than ceiling, for sure. So I'm good with going about half the field's projected ownership on FanDuel on Martin. Chris Dunn looks like he comes up around where the field's going to be at on FanDuel. A lot less of a play on DraftKings, even at 3,800. 5.3% win rate, 2.6% exposure. Didn't really come up all that much. And then Brandon Ingram, another outlier guy. Obviously from a different game, thankfully. Oh, actually, I didn't talk about Misic, though. 11.4% winner, 9% of the top 150 for him. He's getting not quite double this popularity, but it's another guy on FanDuel where I would probably undercut the field on him. The price is fine. He does look like an okay play in limited minutes as a low-end price play, but I think the field's there a little bit too much. Field is out in the 16% range. On DraftKings, Misic didn't come up all that much. 6% win rate, 2% exposure. Probably similar where we want him a little bit less than the field. Ingram on FanDuel, 5.09 points per dollar. He's only 8,000 over there. Both forward spots. Put up 38.6 in 34.5 minutes the other night. He's got basically a 27% usage rate on the season. 1.13 FanDuel points per minute. Pretty solid looking option for 300 less than he is on DraftKings at the same positioning. Didn't really land on DK a little bit. 5.3% of winning lineups, but only 2% of our top 150 overall. Definitely a play on FanDuel, though. 34% of the top 150 against nearly 27% win rate. I like that a lot. He's projected for some popularity. This is assuming he plays. He's got a Q tag right now. He's projected for popularity in the low 20s. So we're well ahead. We're 10, 12 points ahead of the field here. And our win rate is ahead of the field to help support that idea. A couple other differentiated guys, to hurry through it. Kobe White, 10.8% win rate, 9% of the top 150. Here's quickly, he does land on FanDuel in terms of the winning lineups, 14% of the winning lineups. But like I said, for me, he was overowned, and the Sims are bearing that out. 4.6% exposure overall on the top 150 in Sims. On DraftKings, 4.4% win rate, 3.3% exposure. He's an afterthought. He's playable on both sites for sure. We know there's ceiling there. We know that he can have his big upside games, but we're getting a lot more games from him that are around that 0.95, 0.91 kind of output per minute this season. Maxey, Halliburton just kind of priced into, they are who they are. They can certainly succeed in these spots, but there's no real advantage to playing either one of them. They're both playable at best. KCP, if he plays, does look like a value guy on FanDuel. 4,800 at shooting guard, 18% win rate, 23% of the top 150. At 4,500, he didn't land at all on DraftKings. 1% of the top 150, 1.1% win rate. 7% for Koulibaly landed in 5%. 5.5% for Grady Dick landed in 2%. Here's a couple other outliers. Jesus, a big slate. 11.3% for Cam Thomas, winner, 14.6% of the top 150 on FanDuel. And then Grayson Allen, 14.2% winner, 12% of the top 150. So both those guys will come up a decent amount from the mid-range. Grayson Allen at 57, shooting guard, small forward. Cam Thomas at 72, shooting guard, small forward. Thomas is a ton of usage for that price. Definitely not the most reliable guy. Scoring dependent guy for sure. But nearly a 30% usage rate for 7,200. Just on that alone, on the day where those shots fall, there's value there. But very scoring dependent. See what's going on in the chat. Yes, Trey, the new MLB uniforms are awful. Awful. They look like Not even the like replica jerseys, right? You know, you go to like Models or whatever, you're looking on like Amazon or whatever, and it's like, I forget who made the official jerseys these years. I think it's been Nike, but this year Nike went to Fanatics is why it went bad or whatever. But anyway, whoever was making the jerseys these last few years, you go to the store, you go online, and there's all the different knockoffs from, Bob's athletic sportwear company that look all shitty and everything. These look like the lowest end versions of the knockoff jerseys. They are so bad with that little printing, the small shrunken numbers. They look too tight and weirdly cut. They took the piping around the sleeves and they made it into like this little cuff on the sleeves that the players apparently hate. And more than anything else, have you seen the pants? The fucking pants are see-through. It's ridiculous. That picture of Ohtani came out yesterday. They did a media picture of Ohtani, and you could see quite clearly dude was wearing white boxer briefs under his uniform pants. Like, you should not be able to see that. Yeah, they look awful. I think it's going to be a situation where the league's just going to make them redo the jerseys. It can't be that big of an expense, right? Where it would hurt them and they would never do it is if the league was like, you got to redo all the ones that are, for purchase for the fans. They don't give a shit about that. I bet you they make make Fanatics replace those on-field products though, because they're that bad and they're that universally despised by the players. It's not even that the fans don't like them; it's that the players themselves don't like them. So I bet you they get new versions in either before the season starts or within the first month. Wouldn't surprise me at all. Let's keep this thing rolling. Let's jump over to Fords. If they don't really redo them, I feel like it would affect play. Yeah, I mean, guys are already complaining that they're not allowed to like tailor the cut of the pants specifically to them. I didn't know that was a thing before now. But they look, like I said, they look just weirdly cut. Like the jerseys look tight and strange and like uncomfortable. So yeah, I think it could. And little things like that too for like a pitcher to just be dealing with like now all of a sudden there's like an extra inch of fabric on my arm and it just doesn't make me comfy. Like that can, certain pitchers anyway, I can get right in their wacky heads. Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch. Mark K loves Kyrie and Luka versus Durant and Booker. Yeah, that should be a good, fun game to watch. If nothing else. Kyrie looked really good DFS-wise, though. But yeah, that should be a good one. Looking at some more of this. Let's see. Yeah, Mark K also pointed out before the Utah-Charlotte game sticking out. Yeah, definitely. It's all over the board here. Speaking of, Grant Williams right here. Third man in on DraftKings, 20.7% winner, 21.3% of the top 150 for 4,500 power forward and center. Looked pretty decent on the DK slate. Even being Grant Williams, 0.69 per minute type output. He did put up 35 in 27.3 minutes the other night. Since joining the team, I said, as I was saying the words since joining the team, I was typing in the name of his former team. Because I am that slick. Since joining Charlotte, he's been at 1.03 DraftKings points per minute, 0.99 FanDuel points. It's only 91 minutes, 188 possessions. But it's a few games now of significantly increased output. So I think we've got at least a reasonable expectation. I've got him well below what those numbers have been, but ahead. It's kind of like in the middle of what he's done over the last few in this new spot with Charlotte, but not quite up to or down to the down to the level that he'd been at before with Dallas. On FanDuel at 54, he doesn't look all that relevant. He's playable, 5% winner, 5% of the top 150. It's not a situation where he's completely unplayable. But he's very, very different than he is at 4,500 on DraftKings. He's also got the multi-position on DraftKings. Up at the top, we've already talked about Ben Mathurin. We've already talked about Evan Mobley a little bit. But again, Mathurin just crushing the board. 66.8% winner on FanDuel. 52.9% winner on DraftKings at 4,500 shooting guard small forward. 5,000 shooting guard small forward on FanDuel. Just looks like a potential smash spot. Indy. Got him basically right on the season-long number. It's in a 0.87. It's got a little slight tick ahead of that. He's at 0.90 today. It's a game where they're picking up possessions. It's the highest total on the slate. Going up against an awful Detroit team. This is... So I'm just looking at the minutes. We've got Neesmith out. Just want to make sure I've got him right. He's playing 25.5 a game under normal circumstances. I've got him at 30 tonight. He's chalky all around the industry. I mean, it's not a play that I think I'm out of range on. I just wanted to stop and think it through for a second, since he is crushing the board as hard as he is. Let's see the where's the right here? There. Since January 1, let me just put this back to the last 30 days. Last 30 days, no Neesmith. He's been at 0.86. Which is like right again around those season numbers. So it's basically just a minutes thing. You know, we've got him under a point per minute, and he's still crushing that value. And he's capable of putting up a better game. He has a decent usage rate, 22.5% for the season. In this situation, he's been at 22.3% in the 140 minutes over the last 30 days when he's been out there with no Neesmith. What's up, Ken? Ken Woodhouse is here. Good to see you, buddy. Just trying to justify these numbers on Ben Mathurin. When I get a guy like that up at the top of the board with crazy, crazy numbers, I do like to stop and think it through real quick. So I'm going to keep it. I think it's justified, and it's super popular all around the industry. But that said, even with popularity, we are getting to a massive amount of him on both sites. He's projected at the 30-ish% range. Let's call it on DK. And we got to him at about 65%. So we're basically doubled up and a little bit on top on DraftKings. And on FanDuel, we're closer to the field. Well, no, maybe the gap is about the same. The field just has more. On FanDuel, he's pushing nearly a 60% rate. But our win rate is above that. He's a handful of points below that win rate. Well below the top 150 exposure. 0.87 per minute on the season, 0.85 in this situation overall over the last 30 days. Just a lot of upside and 30 minutes. Those minutes are key. He needs to play those 30, not his usual 26. We get a few additional minutes. We get a few additional projected points, a little bit of additional upside, and the price is right. Mobley, just a good per minute guy. On FanDuel, 25.5% win rate, 31% of the top 150 going up against Orlando in that low total game. 1.19 points per minute, though. 1.17 per minute on DK. Landed at 52% of the top 150 at 6,700 on DK. Looks like a very interesting option on both sites. Zion looks interesting on both sites. Basically 20s across the board on both. 8,200 on FanDuel, power forward only. 7,800 on DraftKings, power forward only. 1.25 DK points per minute, 1.24 FanDuel. capable of this and more. 34 minutes, 57.2 FanDuel points. It's another guy for that reasonable mid-range value. We know there's star caliber ceiling or thereabouts, and we're buying a very good usage rate, if nothing else. 8,200 buys you 28% usage, basically. It's not bad. I've done my complaining about Zion. When he's higher priced than this, I tend not to like him, tend not to get to him, even if people are. I think tonight he's right about correctly priced. Lands, the exposures are right around the win rates, right around the field. So I think he's just a good piece. Good piece of like upper mid-range value. Or good piece of upper mid-range playability. Let's call it. Another one from Utah and Charlotte, Johnny Collins. Look at this. Big difference from site to site. 6,200 on both, power forward and center on both. At that price on FanDuel, he lands in 40% of the winners, 41% of the winners, 65% of our top 150. That's high exposure. 19.8% winner on DraftKings, 16% of the top 150. Let's take a look at what that ownership looks like against those numbers, though. Mid-teens ownership on DK. Right around this. So we're around the field on him on DraftKings. I suspect we're going to be well over on FanDuel. We're about double the field on him on FanDuel. 6,200. He's been a 1.03 per minute guy on the season. 19% usage rate. Put a 41.6 in 30 minutes the other night. I don't know if I want to go full double the field on him, but definitely it looks like a spot based on that win rate. That win rate is 10, 11 points beyond where the field is. So based on that, if nothing else, I want to be around this, get to around what the win rate looks like with room to spare if you want to get to him more. Going by the pure exposure in the top 150, he looks like one of the best plays on the FanDuel slate in terms of how much we got to him against this win rate and against where the public is. Public is there. But again, it's like half of what this exposure in the top 150 is. Over the last 30 days, Collins has been in 342 minutes, 732 possessions. He's been at 1.22 on DraftKings, 1.23 on FanDuel, which is notably higher than both of these numbers. I've got him at 1.13, which kind of splitting the difference. I think it's a good spot. If you knocked him back down to just his, season-long production, I think it's still a good spot. That would only be about 2 fantasy points less. Whoops. I changed somebody else there by accident, too. I like it. I think it's a decent John Collins spot. Franz Wagner on the other side of the Orlando-Cleveland game. Not much to talk about on FanDuel. Playable, but minorly so. On DraftKings, 17.6% and came up in 24.6% of the top 150. I don't love this game, but we are getting some pieces from it. The thing that sucks is like they'll come through mathematically based on price, based on expectation of some scoring. But with such a low total, it does tend to you'll get 1 or 2 of the guys, not 4 or 5 of the guys come through from this game. So you are rolling those dice a little bit. But Wagner on DK, 16 per. Excuse me, I said the wrong number. Didn't mean to reveal that. If anybody from RG is watching, but he's owned around that number on DK. So right about the win rate in terms of the DK projected exposure. And we got to him a little bit more. So at 72 on DraftKings, he does look pretty decent. Just a throw-in option on FanDuel, though. RJ, like I said, didn't come up a ton on FanDuel. 2.6% winner, but we got to him a little bit more than the field. Surprisingly, we actually think we're getting a little bit more quickly there, even though I do like RJ better overall. And then on DraftKings, I like RJ a lot. I did a lot of talking about it before, but again, 30% exposure against a 17.5% win rate, and he's been the better of those guys in terms of the per minute value at price. Herb Jones, 0.84 per minute, 0.82 per minute on DraftKings. Just a 15% usage guy. A lot of disappointing games from Herb Jones. I feel like I've had all of the disappointing games from Herb Jones this year. That said, does come through at a 20.3% win rate for 5,500 shooting guard small forward on FanDuel. We got to him less than that, fortunately. Probably below the field. No, actually, you know what? That's a little above the field. Shit. Field is 3 or 4 points below this. There's obviously against that win rate, with the field being at essentially half the win rate, there is a little bit of additional room for more Herb Jones if you want it. But again, it's just, I don't love booking too many extra shares, even when they look okay, of these low usage guys who, you know, defensively oriented types. Not my favorite play on the board by any means. 16% across the board on DraftKings at 4,600. It's a similar story. Oh, you know what? I was looking at DraftKings exposure there. So let me unwind that real quick. On FanDuel, his exposure is right around this number. So I'd say play him at the field's level, but there is maybe a little bit more room on FanDuel. But the field is like right in this territory. So you've got like 4 or 5 additional points based on the win rate. But again, as I was saying, I don't really need to get over the top on a guy like Herb Jones. And then on DraftKings, just 16% across the board puts him a little bit ahead of the field. But it's the exact same equation. I don't really need to get all that much exposure beyond where the field is or beyond these numbers to Herb Jones. If you come up a little short on him, I'm not really going to cry over it either. Aaron Gordon looks pretty good on FanDuel. Nearly a 30% win rate, 37% on the top 150. Just 12 and 10 on DraftKings, but playable on DK. 6,400 on FanDuel is just an aggressively good price for Gordon. 0.93 per minute, 17.3% usage. 42 FanDuel points in 33 minutes the other night. Capable of stepping in and having a very good game in any scenario. And just going up against Washington, fairly low-end opponent. So I like the spot for Aaron Gordon. I think we'll see some Jokic. DeRozan, playable on FanDuel, 12.9% winner, but came up less than that in the top 150. Same story on DraftKings, 14.2%, came up about half that in our top 150. That was another spot. I just don't love drawing too many shares of the Chicago team against that Boston team. DeRozan's projected for right around this level of exposure on DraftKings. I could be at or below the field. I'm comfy with being about half of where the field is on both sites. He's a guy who comes up a fair amount for us too. He's a little bit more popular on FanDuel. I don't mind. Yeah, we're about half the field on FanDuel as well. The win rate is below his exposure, his public exposure that was run in the sim. So I like getting about half of the public on DeRozan. Danny Avdija, playable on both sites for sure. 13 across the board on FanDuel. Came up 19% of the time against a 13.6% win rate at 6,800 on DraftKings, which is interesting. We're like, half again on top of the field maybe. Field's projected for just barely into the double digits, a little bit above 10%, a little below this. So he's winning a little bit more than the field is getting to him, and our exposure is well ahead of the field. Not a bad option. 1.05 per minute overall for the season. Over the last 30 days, I'm pretty sure it's an uptick. Come on. I'm just checking in my sheet. Oh, there it goes. Last 30 days up to 1.16 DK points, 1.10 FanDuel points. So there's been a little bit more there for him in the last month or so. I don't mind Denny from a mid-range type option. Lauri Markkanen, 17% winner, but just 1% exposure on FanDuel. Probably just getting boxed out by price at the position. Jordan Clarkson, 10% win rate, just 2% exposure on FanDuel. couple more pieces from the Utah side of things. They came up pretty much the same on DraftKings, lower win rates for both of them, but came up similarly in terms of our exposure against their win rates on DraftKings. So it looks like both Clarkson and Markkanen just a little bit overpriced. We're drawing more of those like $4,500, $5,000 types from this Utah-Charlotte game. So the expensive guys get squeezed by expensive guys from other games. I think that's correct. I think that's where the focus in that Utah-Charlotte game should be, is more on the values. Differentiated guys site to site. There's a biggie. Michael Porter, holy hell. 46.5%. Well, let me just take a look at that. That's a big number for MPJ. Wow, he's popular too. Holy shit. 6,100, I guess it is a pretty okay price. Might be a little heavy on that projection. MPJ, I've got him. It's 0.91 for the season. I've got him at around 1 today, but this is assuming full minutes, this is a potentially killer spot for them. 233 point total. They're favored by 15.5, but you could see minutes getting trimmed a little. He's averaging about 32. I've got him at 32 minutes. Played 34 minutes on average over the last 3, 37 their last time out. He's projected to be super popular on FanDuel. But we are ahead of his popularity in terms of the win rate, ahead of his popularity in terms of our exposure. Looks like a good option on FanDuel. At 6,500 on DraftKings, he's just, didn't really come up in the top 150, but once 5% win rate, he's minorly playable over there. That's one of the bigger differentiated plays we've seen in recent memory. Brandon Ingram we talked about already, but again, 26.8% winner, 34% exposure. I like that. So just very, very different plays for Ingram and Porter site to site. And we're well ahead of the field on the Porter shares. Siakam, 13.17% winner, 15% exposure on FanDuel. Looks pretty decent. Just getting to yet another piece of good upside in Indy. At 8,100, given the per minute production that he's had since joining Indy, that's not bad. 10% winner for KD, 6% of the top 150. I have no issues getting to him 10, 12% of the time if you want him. We talked about that being just a really good game. If that game's on TV, I'm going to watch it. Or I'll just actually pull up the NBA package and watch it there. But I tend to just stick with TV, as I've talked about many, many times. Not a lot down board. 14% for Grayson Allen. We talked about him during the guard spot, but 14 and 12. He's always hitting the board from that lower mid-range. Or what is he? Upper mid-range, I guess. 5,700. Middle mid-range? Whatever you want to call it. Just looking for some guy like mid-single digits types, like Cam Johnson is okay on DraftKings. 7% winners, 6% of the top 150. Some 8% winners that didn't really come up in your top 150 at all here. Just a few shares each for Josh Hart, Jaylen Brown, Jordan Clarkson, Lauri Markkanen. But all of them pulling between 7 and 8% win rates. 10% win rates for DiVincenzo and KP. Both came up a little bit lighter than that on DK. On FanDuel, KP didn't come up at all. 2.5% winner, 0 of the top 150. He's 8,800 power forward and center. I've got him just at 30 minutes tonight. It's right around what his season average has been. I don't really see much more beyond that for Porzingis here. DiVincenzo, we talked about, just looks better on FanDuel, but still playable for sure on DraftKings with a bit of a ceiling. The price is just, $7,700. You can't go that much higher for Dante DiVincenzo and not have it just be a little bit silly. But just shooting the lights out in this extended role. For the season, Devo's at 3 threes a game made, 7.3 attempts, shooting 41.5% from 3. rewind this back to, let's call it like January 8th. Somewhere around there where the Knicks changed a little bit. Oh, where's his threes? There they are. Since January 8th, DiVincenzo in 578 minutes, 1,151 possessions, has taken 189 threes, making 38.6% of them. He's been a lights-out shooter, and just the point there was just, not at all afraid to take those threes. I don't have the Wowie doesn't have the per game attempts number, but I suspect that's higher. I don't know how many games they've played since the 8th, but I think it's somewhere in the around like 10 attempts per game, up from the 7 and change. Let's jump to centers. I think we covered most of the forward. Some other, again, more. There's some playable guys in here. It's difficult on a 10 game slate to talk about everybody, but like Jason Tatum, I don't want to have go completely by the wayside because he's Jason Tatum. But 6.3% win rate, just half that in terms of our exposure at 9,900. Both forward spots on FanDuel for 10-3, just 2.1% win rate, 1.3% exposure. It's a lot of high end players that kind of just slip through the cracks when going through it like this. But of course, Tatum could succeed tonight. Of course, Kawhi Leonard could succeed tonight. Didn't in the Sims, 9,000. He's projected just fine. I've actually got him a few points ahead of other places, which I think is correct. But didn't really land. But again, wouldn't shock anybody, I don't think, if Kawhi Leonard was in a winning lineup with a great score. Here's Jalen. Here's Jalen. Better on DK for Jalen. 8% winner, 3% of the top 150 on FanDuel. 2% winner, 0% of the top 150. That Boston team really didn't land on FanDuel at all. Let's look at centers. It is, 12 minutes to 6. I'm going to try and get out with a hard stop at 6 so that I can have some time to update and then build my lineups. I say that every time. We'll see if we can pull it off. There's Jokic. Hanging in, 8.8% win rate, 4.6% of the top 150 on FanDuel. I have no issues whatsoever given the win rate. If you wanted to push that up to 10% exposure, perfectly fine. You're probably going to be field-ish. No, actually, if you got to 10% on Jokic, you'd be about double the field in this projection. Kind of like that now. This is right around the field. Where he came up in the sim is almost exactly the expected ownership of the field. But since we're double that in terms of our win rate, I have no issues pushing Jokic out to like 10% if you can figure out how to afford it. On DraftKings, he looks like a very different option. 17.2% win rate, 20% of the top 150 for Jokic on DraftKings. That looks like an absolute smash spot. He is projected around those levels of exposure. Not surprisingly, considering the win rate. The field's actually a couple points ahead. But I have no issues if you want to be just exactly with the field on Jokic on DK. Even maybe a little bit above. You're kind of stretching it for that expensive of a play against the 17% win rate if you had like 25%. But it's Jokic. It's one of the overall just highest raw ceilings available. So if you're going to do it, if you're going to make that quote-unquote mistake, make it on a guy like Jokic. Eric Herman, what's going on, buddy? Eric Herman asks, on your projections, should I just look at the top guys and say those guys are no-brainers? So, yeah, to a degree, right? Like Jokic or Luka or guys like that, the high-priced, high-projected guys that we're talking about, the best players, the MVP candidates in the league, they're the luxury items, like I always say. Even when they have lower numbers, you can pretty much always play them and be relatively okay. Where it impacts you is you're spending too much in that spot, so now you need to book more value guys against lineups that are not using the high-priced star and are booking a couple more mid-range guys. So like they'll have $500 advantages on you in 2 of the other positions, if that makes sense. So you're taking a suboptimal Jokic or similar superstar, and then you're de-optimizing 2 other spots basically in order to pay for that suboptimal play. You can do it, you can get away with it, but it doesn't necessarily math out that way when we look at it against the Sims. That's why they come up lower in the Sims a little bit. In terms of, can you just look at high projections? there's always multiple factors, right? None of it exists in a one factor vacuum, be it price, position, projection per minute per dollar. It all works in tandem together and also in tandem with like everything else that's available at that position. So it's difficult to say like, yes, high projection equals play. If you've got 30 seconds to build a lineup and you've got to make your last choice, sure, just go with the higher projected guy if you can afford him. Right. That is, it does ultimately boil down to that if you're talking about one spot in that last lineup. But when you're building a full lineup, there's that cascade impact that I mentioned when I was talking about the high end plays. So that's where it becomes important to understand the full concept. And I'm sure you do. I'm not implying that you don't understand it. But that's where to appreciate the full concept of like this projection, this rate with that kind of per minute expectation, that kind of potential ceiling, what does the ceiling look like at price within position against these other guys informs the entire nature of the play. So it's a little bit yes, it's a lot no to your question. But in a crunch of just, I need to make a decision on one guy, two guys in a lineup that I've already built based on all those parameters that I kind of like, sure, you can default to the projection. Hopefully that made at least a tiny bit of sense. Boncaro is in like that. Thank you, Power. Alan Margot, what's going on? Can't do my Springer play, sadly. Just because of where he is now? I assume that's what you mean. That was a hot play for a minute there. All right, so looking at some of these centers, just to take the top end off the page here. Mobley, we've talked about a number of times because of his power forward eligibility. Marvin Bagley has power forward on FanDuel, 13.4% winner against 6% exposure. Feels like the field's probably there a little bit more on Bagley than they necessarily should be. On DraftKings, he came up 20.7% in winning lineups, and we got to him more. So I think it's a reverse situation on DK where the field's probably behind on Bagley. 27%. Damn it, I didn't mean to say that. So he's right around that exposure. This is telling us to be like right with the field on Bagley. But he's an okay option at 5,300 on DK. Grant Williams I talked about when we ran down the forwards, but again, just looks pretty good. I've got him in between this number and what he's been since joining Charlotte in the 3-4 games that he's played with them. And it's putting him at a pretty decent win rate on DraftKings, pretty decent exposure. On FanDuel, just minorly playable. John Collins we talked about. It's the opposite. Very, very playable. Aggressively good on FanDuel. Potentially a little bit high, but again, even if I took 2 points away from him and put him like exactly at his season-long number, exactly where other people have him, he would still be crushing these numbers. We'd probably be more in line with the field then, but I like the option on FanDuel at 62. On DraftKings, came up pretty decently, 19.8%, 16% of the top 150 for 62, but given the same price of it, obviously, against the higher FanDuel cap, he's going to look a lot better. Jokic, we just talked about. Vooch, 5.1% winner in 5.1% winner, just 1.3% of our top 150 on FanDuel. Another one, I just don't love throwing him against that Boston front court and just Boston in general. He's a much better looking option on DraftKings at 75 though. 8,400 on FanDuel is a little tight with the single center option. On DK, you'll probably see him a little bit alongside Jokic shares given how much they both came up. 38% of our center exposure going to either Jokic or Vooch. Not bad. We'll probably pair those two a few times. And a lot of one or the other situation there. So at 75, I don't dislike him. 1.13 DraftKings points per minute. Changes the nature of that spot quite significantly. Kessler has been coming up a good amount for us on FanDuel. Didn't really land. It's weird. It's another spot where just for how he's priced, he's 7,000 on FanDuel because he hits the scoreboard harder over there, 1.17. He's a full tenth of a point less per minute over the course of the season on DraftKings. But at 51 on DK, nearly 2,000 less, he actually lands pretty decently. 14.2% win rate, 22% exposure in the top 150. Potentially sneaky little option. We are the exposure, the public exposure that this ran against is right around what this win rate is. So our top 150 exposure is actually well out ahead of the projected public number. Kind of like Kessler on the DK slate, as long as he stays cheap. Again, just his game fits the FanDuel scoring model better, but that's why he costs $7,000 and doesn't really hit the board on FanDuel. Miles Turner, definitely playable on FanDuel, less so on DraftKings, but playable. 8% of our top 150 on DraftKings, 11% on FanDuel. Jakob Pertl, 12% of our top 150 on FanDuel against a 6% win rate, so we're getting to him a little bit more than that. Just 5s across the board on DraftKings. DraftKings is really specific to these guys, and then you've got just minorly playable guys down through like, I don't know what, those 5 maybe? So DraftKings, between power forward, center, and util, you want to get to a fair amount of Mobley, Bagley, Grant Williams, John Collins, Jokic, Vooch, Kessler, and then maybe Zinger is like your cut line since his ownership fell below 10% against a 10% win rate. You can play some Zinger. You can play some Miles Turner, some Jakob Pertl. But we start getting really thin after like Jalen Duren here, who landed in 5% of the winners, 7% of the top 150. Then it dips. You're in the very low single digits the rest of the way on DraftKings. So it's basically Jalen Duren and up with a priority on all these guys above Kristaps Porzingis for DraftKings in the potentially 3 big man spots, or 4 if you want to throw forward into that as well. Power forward, center, and util. So good spread of these guys there, and then all this block of guys is like, you can sprinkle them in. Everybody below that, non-priority at best. Like Şengün, 8,600, 1.9% winner, 0% of the top 150. Chet at 73 didn't land at all. 71, Precious didn't really land. $7,400 Kyle Kuzma didn't really land. FanDuel-wise, we're getting less of Grant Williams. So still priority for Mobley and Bagley. Lower priority for Bagley, though, than on DK. Way lower priority for Grant Williams than on DK. John Collins, higher priority than on DK. Looks great on FanDuel. Looks good on DK. Jokic, lower priority, but still very, very playable, and I want to be well ahead of the field here. So I'd like to be around 10% Jokic on FanDuel. Vooch, not really a priority, and that goes for most of these dudes, except for Miles Turner, who stands out a little bit. So Turner and Pertl, where I started this part of the discussion, 9.6% winner, 6.2% winner, 11, 12% of the top 150 exposure on FanDuel. Then we drop down Jared Allen, who we've touched on a couple of times already, but 12.4% winner, 10% of the top 150 on FanDuel. One of the last playable guys on DK. Isaac is a throw-in on FanDuel. Şengün is more playable on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings at 8,700. 8% win rate against 9% exposure. I don't really have an issue if you wanted to go a little bit, 10, a little bit higher. 10 to 15, somewhere in that neighborhood. Şengün is not projected for much ownership at all. If you were 15% ownership on Şengün on FanDuel today, it's not a great option considering where that win rate is, but you'd be roughly 5 times the projected ownership for the field. And he did come up against that ownership. So I don't totally dislike taking even a little bit more of a position just on a good per minute option at the center only. It's just I don't necessarily want to grab a couple, misshapen Şengün shares rather than taking a couple additional misshapen Jokic shares. Obviously, we're talking about very, very different price tiers. Nobody else really down board. A little bit of playability for PJ. Terrible points per dollar, but just 4.26% of winners, 2.6% of the top 150. Nobody else really differentiated across sites. So it's kind of tight among the big men. Nick Richards is also here. 10.2%, 8% exposure. He's also, he's at a lower price point than Şengün, but that's another situation where, these look about the same. Arguably, Richards is a little bit better because of his value. I think I would still rather take a position against the field on a guy like Şengün than go down to a Nick Richards if I can make that decision within the construct that I'm building. That's about it, and we're at 6 o'clock on the nose. So let's pull up the lineups, and we're not getting out here at exactly 6. Travis says Valanciunas took Şengün to the woodshed last game they played. Don't remember it, but I'll take your word for it. Absolutely, buddy. You never steer us wrong. Yeah, no real opinion coming out of that information. Neither one of them hit the board all that hard. I mean, if you wanted to say that that's a reason to grab one share of Joval when he came up in none of the top 150, sure. If you want to say that that's a reason to, back off any additional exposure to Şengün, you already weren't really getting him on DK or shouldn't have been. 0% exposure against the 1.9%. Where it would potentially matter, if you're talking about shutting him down, would be on FanDuel. We're mathing out 2 okay numbers there. Let's see where we've got him over the... I think I was below his season long. Yeah, he's 1.31 over the course of the entire season. I've got him at 1.23 for tonight. I think that jibed more with what he's done over the last 30 days. And then this is just a situation where they're not picking up anything. Going up against the New Orleans team. Nolans. Pretty good defensive rating. 112.7, one of the better defensive ratings in the league. So I think it makes sense to keep him a little bit below. And if you have got additional justification there, Travis watched it. Travis is a Rockets fan. Watched it. It's been a back and forth between them. He's playing Joval. Okay. All right. So maybe a little bit of additional love for Joval. I've got him at low minutes. It's impacting his overall projection here, but not going to begrudge you the play whatsoever. And could be, potential reason to shy away from getting over the field on Şengün. And again, that was, low-end exposure to Şengün, low-end results for Şengün anyway. Let's take a quick look, and I mean quick, at AceMind. AceMind.io, our Sims partner. That's where all the win rates come from. Obviously run with my projections, with the ownership from where we get it. And then go over to acemind.io. You drop all that information in. And then I pull out the sim results that we're talking about here. This is DraftKings. DK lineups. These are all over the place. A lot of guys we talked about. Not a lot of theme to these, though. Man, remember when I said these were going to be balanced lineup day? Balanced lineup day. A lot of Ben Mathurin. A lot of Keontae George, as expected. Those are the 2 of the top owned guys, top value plays on the board from that mid-range. These are very chalky, very balanced kind of lineups, but this is essentially everybody that we talked through during the show, just kind of landing in a big mixed bag of stuff. Good amount of Mobley landing at center, at power forward. Where we're not getting Mobley, we're taking some Collins, we're taking some Grant Williams. And we've got room for Zion shares there. Mixed bag at center, again, through all the guys that we talked about, though. Bagley. Turner was playable. Duran Zubac didn't really come up that much. Vooch, Bagley, Turner. Some Pirtle in there. The Luka lingering in the util spot on that one. Cade, Ben Mathurin, Cam Johnson, Grant Williams, Bagley, Keontae George, John Collins, Luka. Balanced. The name I'm not seeing a ton of. We only got one in these top, the top 15 of the top 150. Only one Jokic at the very top of the board. Is there another one? There's one. He comes up a lot, but it does look like he's not necessarily crashing the absolute best lineups of the day, which is interesting. Considering that we got to him in these top 150 that we're looking at, he's in like 20% of these. It's just not at the very, very top. It does have a limiting impact. If one scrub opens up, if one guy in like the 3s opens up with any kind of value on DraftKings, I suspect that we'll get to more Jokic in these top end lineups, and we would get to more Jokic in just lineups overall. That would create a fair amount of salary. Right now, just that spend on Jokic without a corresponding super value play has a more limiting impact on some of these lineups. Like this one is much lower quality in terms of like you've got Fournier in there. Jalen Williams is fine. But overall, it just throws the lineup balance off a little bit. This is more Starsy Scrubsy than these are. RJ landing in a good amount of the DK lineups up at the top of the board. I like that. We talked about him. Denny Avdia is in a handful of these. So if we're looking theme-wise, it's like mid-range mostly. I mean, it's mid-range mostly at all these spots. I'm going to say the same thing about every spot. It's a chalky, balanced kind of day. I'm struggling to find anything like overly unique to say about this right now. Just kind of follow the ownership type day. Get to a couple of those plays that we talked about that look good, will be chalky, but look better to us than the field necessarily. Trey Nemhard was, I don't think, coming up all that much. Yeah, Nemhard, on DraftKings, he looks all right, actually, Trey. I think you're fine there. Reasonable enough pivot from that Matherin exposure. At 4,400, Nemhard in 30 plus minutes, 13.2% winner, 17% of the top 150. Should have mentioned him. I just missed him as I was going through. Like I said, kind of difficult to nail everybody. On FanDuel, Nemhard not really a play. He's 5,800 on FanDuel versus 4,400 on DraftKings. So just 1.7% winner on FanDuel, 2% exposure in the top 150. One of the lower end pieces from Indy on FanDuel. But on DraftKings, yeah, you can definitely get to him. Trey's trying to throw me off after 6 o'clock. We will talk about Lost in depth at some other point on some other show. No, they were not dead the entire time if you've seen the entire series. It gets really wonky. I loved Lost the early seasons, but where their real problem was they weren't really creating mysteries so much as mystery boxes on the show. So like a character would see something, but for us it would just be off screen, right? So that's not really a mystery so much as just like they're wrapping something up. But the big problem where they really suffered is they didn't predetermine where any of the answers were going to be. So there was a time at which I think they were writing that show where they were dead all the whole time. And then it kind of went away from that as the internet figured it out in those nascent days of internet fandom and everything. That was a lot of fun. Like, all the crazy theorizing in the fan community around that show and all. They just got into the hatch. You're just starting season 2. You said restarted. So I assume, I won't be giving anything away. I assume that means you've watched the full series. But no, I'm not giving anything away by exposing that. But they make a confusing twist for that idea in the last season. When you get there, we can talk about that. I don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't seen it. But no, whole time, not dead the whole time. Not the whole time. Great show. Seen the whole thing before, just forget how it goes. All right, yeah. There's a lot of really good episodes that show suffered reputation-wise from how good it was and all the character work that they did and why it was so good, just because of, the mysteries and resolving them, not resolving them to anyone's really satisfaction. But yeah, as you go through that, there's a lot of just great episodes that are in there that'll pop up. Great characters and everything. FanDuel board looks a little bit more thematic. It's exactly the same kind of a situation where we're just getting all those popular mid-range types. But there's more established theme. Maybe it's just happenstance that these guys landed in the same column this time. But you can see a lot of Darius Garland at the point, a lot of Colin Sexton at the point. Some SGA creeping through who we didn't talk about. Cade Cunningham creeping through who we did talk about. Grayson Allen, Jalen Williams, Ben Matherin, Cody Martin, all landing in the shooting guard spots. KCP also coming up a decent amount there. And then some randoms like Paul George, Cam Thomas, Chris Dunn was a value option. RJ landing a little bit at small forward. Ton of MPJ. Touched on that one. That was one of our oddballs. He's popular on FanDuel, but we were getting a lot more of them in the field. Don't love the Herb Jones of it. A lot of John Collins, which we expected. John Collins and MPJ, Aaron Gordon. I don't love the Aaron Gordon MPJ together of it. I don't typically box out guys who play together. But that's not necessarily my favorite approach to that team. especially with Jokic there as well. Miles Turner. I think I like the shape of FanDuel lineups a little bit better, but it might, again, just be the nature of how FanDuel does it, where these guys are next to one another rather than one guard here, one guard over here, and only one down at the end with the way that the DraftKings lineups come up. What's our center spot look like? Turners and Pirtles through the top. We do have John Collins eligibility there. There's a Şengün landing high up, another one. So we got to go a ways down before we find our first Jokic. There he is. So remember, he was coming up not nearly as much in the top 150, but it was against a higher win rate than his exposure and than his public exposure. So that creates a little bit of a situation where it is the same thing. It has a limiting impact on two other spots in your lineup, but especially if a value emerges sometime in the next 45 minutes, I think you can grab some additional shares of Jokic. Fairly straightforward slates, though, guys. For a 10-gamer, maybe it's the post-All-Star break nature of it. Who knows? We'll see what comes up. Let's see. I'll check the news real quick before I end the show. Hartenstein playing. Donovan Mitchell out. That's all right. That'll create some value there. Cavs starting Garland, Okoro, Strus, Evan Mobley, and Jarrett Allen. So that'll create some value probably around Max Strus, who I had lower significantly. Darius Garland will probably go get a bit of an uptick from already looking pretty good. Bradley Beal is also out now. Beal's out, so we got some changes. Maxi Kleber in, Derek Lively in, Luka in, DiVincenzo playing. Banchero playing, we had that one. Per Tibbs, Hartenstein will have a minutes guideline if he plays, which just means Tibbs is saying that the doctors told me a number that I will fully ignore if he's out on the court, and Hartenstein says he's going to play. I would expect full 32, 34 minutes, somewhere on there. Got weird the last season, says Beantown. Yeah, didn't love the ending. I agree with people who say that they didn't stick the landing. I think, as I was saying, they wrote themselves into a corner where it was just impossible to write a satisfactory ending. So they did what they could. It was okay, but it wasn't nearly as good as it could have been. But yeah, they got into some weird shit for sure. But still, it's become an underrated show just because of all that hate that those later seasons inspired. Anyway, let me get out of here. I got to get some projections updates. 6:15, they'll be up by 6:30 or so. And that's about it, gang. So happy return to NBA action. It was a fun show. Went quick. Good luck out there. Somebody go win something. A couple big prizes to take down tonight. Go get them, gang. See you tomorrow.